This paid message is from Thomas Nelson Publishing. Do you notice that when your body isn't moving, your mind is still racing? Anxiety, to-do list, and the spiral of negative thought patterns often keep us from the peace we long for. In her book, Present in Prayer, best-selling author Jennifer Tucker shares a guide to the practice of biblical meditation and invites readers to slow down and linger on God's Word. Learn more at presentinprayer.com.
When we meet Jacob, we can ask him ourselves what it was like to wrestle with God. Except, of course, many of us already know. Surely I am not alone in wrestling for my children. There are men and women here who wrestle for their relationship with their spouse, for their careers. Jacob and Esau had a war with each other, but really it was God that Jacob was at war with.
Welcome to The God-Centered Life with Josh Moody. Continuing our march through the book of Genesis in a series called A New Beginning. This is a new fight from Genesis 32. Josh Moody is senior pastor of College Church in Wheaton, Illinois, and I'm Todd Bastide. Interesting positioning of this story in our opening soundbite there, Josh. You're suggesting that Jacob isn't the only one who wrestles with God.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we, at some level, all of us, at least at some point in our lives, are wrestling with God, wrestling to come to terms with the fact, ultimately, that He's God and we are not. And the story of Jacob speaks to that spiritual wrestling to find hope and meaning and a new relationship with God.
So much more than an Old Testament story on a flannel graph from Sunday school. This is where that Old Testament reaches into our lives. Let's take a look at Genesis 32. Here's Josh.
So far today, God, I have done all right. I haven't gossiped. I haven't lost my temper, and I haven't been greedy, grumpy, nasty, selfish, or overindulgent. And I haven't told anyone to mind their own business or stay out of mine. I'm really glad with how I'm doing so far this morning, God. But in a moment, I'm going to have to get out of bed. And then I'm going to really need your help. Well, Jacob really needed God's help. You remember the story that's been set up so far in the book of Genesis. Jacob and Esau have been long in conflict, and Jacob is now returning home. And the last thing he knew about Esau was that Esau had vowed to kill him. As far as Jacob knows then, the same sort of intention is in Esau's mind. And when Jacob hears that Esau has 400 men with him, he assumes the violence that he has been conceiving in his mind has now given birth to military campaign. Now, the backdrop to all of this, as we're going through the book of Genesis, is this issue of blessing. Esau had wanted Isaac's blessing. Jacob had connived and deceived in order to get Isaac's blessing. God, in Genesis chapter 1, made the whole universe, we're told, and then we are told He announced blessing upon humanity. He blessed them, be fruitful and multiply. That is, God is the King, and you, humans, made in my image, that is, you are to reflect my rule, my good rule, in how you go out into the whole world and represent my good rule as you extend my kingdom. He blessed them, be fruitful and multiply. But you know the story. In Genesis, Adam and Eve rebelled against God and so entered into the world not a blessing but a curse. Genesis chapter 3 describes the curse that enters into the world. God has a plan, and Genesis chapter 12 that we looked at a few weeks ago, God gathers a new people around this man Abraham and announces blessing through him to all nations. The gospel to all nations, this blessing. Now, in chapters 27 and on, there's a fight over the blessing. What is this blessing going to be like? Is it purely a human, material, selfish kind of blessing? And who's going to get it? Now, when we use the word blessing, we have all sorts of different ideas in our mind these days about what it means to be, quote unquote, blessed. And so as we begin to fill in the category of being recipients, vessels, people ready to receive God's blessing, we need to be sure that we understand what it means to be blessed. And so as the story began in Genesis 1, Genesis 3, curse enters, God, Abraham, Genesis 12. Now this fight over blessing with Jacob and Esau, we need to look ahead to have our minds filled with the right category about blessing, to how Jesus himself described the blessing that would come through himself as the fulfillment to these promises so long ago announced. So we come to the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, and Jesus has a series of blessings. Blessed are you, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And that series of blessings is framed around the kingdom of heaven at the beginning and the kingdom of heaven at the end. That is the rule of God that was perfect in Genesis chapter 1, rebelled against in Genesis chapter 3, reinstituted through God's work in the person of Abraham. Now fight over it in the chapter that we're looking at this morning. Jesus defines as being recipients of the kingdom of heaven. That is the rule of God, a right relationship, number one, with the king, and then that kingdom extended for all eternity. Where there will be one day not just a spiritual relationship with God, but a fulfilled promise of the new heaven and the new earth, the home of righteousness that will be physical, that we, in right relationship with God, if we are in right relationship with God, will be inheritors of that blessing. So this fight, this battle over the blessing is no small thing. It is to define what it means to be blessed. Is it selfish, getting what I want, controlling, making sure someone else doesn't get it, but I get it? Or is it the blessing of God that goes to all nations, ultimately through Christ, that will be fulfilled when he returns? Blessing. Jacob is really figuring out how he can possibly come up with, at a human level, a way to reconcile with his brother. How we need that sort of shrewd wisdom today. Many of you will know, of course, that I'm from London. I wasn't born in Texas. In London recently, there's been a new terrorist attack. I actually proposed to my wife right across from where that terrorist attack took place. We know all about such things today. We live in a world where human is at war with human. And our world leaders are trying to find ways to either defeat or come up with appeasement, some way to find peace. But it isn't just global, is it? It's also national and ecclesial, even in the church. You would have to have been entirely asleep over the last few years to have not noticed that there's been a renewed racial tension in America. Where is the solution to that? Now, Jacob comes up with one tactic, which I think is shrewd and wise and certainly acceptable. That is, he offers a peace gift, a peace offering. Now, you and I perhaps would not be particularly pleased to receive 15 cows or whatever it is, but at the time it was a significant gift. Yeah, there is a simple human strategy of peacemaking. Certainly in the church, and we'll leave all the governmental challenges up to those who are called to exercise government and pray for them and pray they're given wisdom. But among Christian brothers and sisters, the peace offering, the gift. Yeah, that is a good strategy, and he's nowhere rebuked for doing it, as far as I can see in the Bible. He gives him 15 cows and 10 oxen and 3 donkeys. Go ahead. But there's more at work here than that. Underneath this apparent battle between Jacob and Esau is a different kind of battle. The heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart. Very famously, a long time ago, G.K. Chesterton was asked to reply to a series of letters that were taking place in the Times about what is wrong with the world, and there have been all sorts of sophisticated answers given. G.K. Chesterton replied simply like this to one little letter in the Times of London this way: "Dear sir, what is the problem with the world? I am. Yours sincerely, G.K. Chesterton." The heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart. And so Jacob does not simply give gifts. He is initiated. God initiates a wrestling with him.
Ever wrestled with imagining this story? Wrestling with God? We're jumping right back to do just that in a moment, but first a reminder that the God-Centered Life is being distributed via numerous channels. Maybe you're listening via podcast. Be sure to like that podcast, as that increases the exposure. Plus, you can pass along a recommendation to somebody else who might also enjoy podcasting. Thanks for your help. Back into Genesis now. Here's Josh.
Now, this is a mysterious passage. And when I come across a mysterious passage, I look far and wide for people who are wiser than me to help me understand it. I hope you do the same. This is what Jonathan Edwards said about the passage, and it has shaped my view on it. It's very profound. Edwards said this: "When God has a design of bestowing blessing on persons in answer to prayer, he stirs them up to be earnest in seeking. And oftentimes, for a while, he seems not to hear or regard their request, but on the contrary, seems to oppose and resist them, as the angel seems to strive against Jacob in the wrestle, which is for the trial of persons' resolution, constancy, and perseverance in the seeking of the blessing." Let me break that down to you in one non-18th century sentence. When God desires to bless a person in answer to his or her prayers, God will often stir that person to passionate seeking in prayer, even appearing to resist them, so that that person might, through trials, become a fit vessel to receive the blessing. Or Jesus put it most simply like this: you can't put new wine in old wineskins. And Jacob here must become Israel. And his hip is touched, and his personality is reshaped so that he becomes a fit recipient of the blessing, of the kingdom of heaven, the right relationship with God, and the eternal kingdom to come. Well, let me put it in tech speak today. Your computer hardware must also be updated to run the new software of the blessing of the kingdom of heaven. So in all the mysteriousness of the sovereignty of God and the wrestling match that's going on here, God has designed this wrestle to reshape us to be fit recipients of the blessing of the kingdom of heaven. Now, I will get 100 emails if I don't try to dive into some of the mysteriousness, so let me do that for a moment. There are mysteries to this text sufficient to trouble the unsleeping mind of 1,000 scholars. Who was this man who wrestled with Jacob? If he was God, how was it that Jacob overcame him? What is the answer? The answer seems to me to be this: Jacob saw God face to face. Peniel, he saw the face of God. Jacob saw God face to face, but was not immediately consumed by seeing God's infinite holiness, because the face of God that he saw was the pre-incarnate face of the Son of God. He wrestled with Christ. Yet, someone might still ask, why was it that Jacob was able to have victory over God? Well, My answer would be that in some way God then allowed him to win. But then someone would say, was the battle a mere show, a charade, not real? And that seems not to give fair representation of the drama of the text. While these mysteries and others can fill our minds for 1,000 upon thousands of years, and we will have eternity to explore them if we are fit recipients of the kingdom of heaven, when we meet Jacob and we can ask him ourselves what it was like to wrestle with God. Except, of course, many of us already know. Surely I am not alone in wrestling for my children. There are men and women here who wrestle for their relationship with their spouse, for their careers. Jacob and Esau had a war with each other, but really it was God that Jacob was at war with. And like a father who has a son who loves to wrestle, God gets with Jacob all sweaty and physical and lets him pin him down, and then in a moment of fatherly sovereignty flips on his back and touches his hip. Not just to show him who really is boss, but to reshape his personality and his character, which the physical reshaping would be a symbol of, to remind him henceforth, so that he could be a new wineskin for new wine, new hardware for new software, a fit vessel for the blessing of the kingdom of heaven. Now, I know prayer is hard, isn't it? We can be so pious about prayer. If you ever want to bring someone down a level or two in how they're feeling about their spirituality, just ask about their prayer life. That will usually do it. Like the person who said at the beginning of 1 year, he said, Lord, give me a fat bank account this year and a fit body, and make sure you get it the right way around, not like last year. Or the other person who rather unknowingly was overheard to pray, Lord, I really pray, Lord, would you please give me patience? I'm such an impatient man. Would you give me patience, and would you do it now? But in all this wrestling, God uses it to reshape us. J.H. Jowett said this, all vital praying makes a drain on a man's vitality. True intercession is a sacrifice, a bleeding sacrifice. E.M. Bounds, one of the most famous authors on prayer, describing spiritual giants, those who had massively been used by God to advance the kingdom of heaven, he said this about them: they were not leaders because of brilliancy of thought, not because they were exhaustless in resources, not because of their magnificent culture or their native gifts or intellectual capabilities, but because by the power of prayer they could command and control the power of God, command the power of God. And then we enter into the mystery. For no human can command the power of God. And yet the prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. And God in his sovereignty allows us to be caught up into his work through prayer and stirs us up to be earnest in the seeking of it, so that in that wrestling we might be reshaped to be fit receptacles for the blessing of the kingdom of heaven. One of the great heroes of Cottage Church has inspired many of our commitments to Bible teaching and the way we support Bible teaching all around the world. One of those great heroes was the preacher Charles Simeon. Charles Simeon was a man very committed to Bible teaching, and he trained many younger pastors and all this sort of thing, and he's become a model for many of us. Charles Simeon was a pastor, but also a professor at Cambridge University, King's College. And where his rooms are, we still know where they are. You can see them. They're right up high. There's a court, and they're on the corner of this court. The high building, it's probably higher than the top of the balcony here. And he had a small set of rooms up there with 2 or 3, I think it's 2, maybe 3 small windows overlooking a narrow parapet that went around the court and allowed you, if you wanted, to fix a roof, you could get up there. Charles Simeon, with his friends, determined that he would get up early every morning to pray. He had a rather extravagant way for a sort of 18th century alarm clock to get him out of bed. Early every morning he would get out of bed and he would open the window. They weren't designed for someone to crawl out, but he would open the window, and on this narrow parapet he could be seeing every morning, earnestly seeking God in prayer for the blessing of the kingdom of heaven in Cambridge and around the world. Now, my goal this morning through this word is twofold. One is that we, in experience, we would increasingly, perhaps the Son, dramatically, this moment, be transformed from Jacob to Israel, to be fit receptacles for the blessing of the kingdom of heaven, number one. Number two, that we as a church which is a praying church. Rochelle and I have never felt more prayed for than we do here. We are a praying church. I know that's experience of many of us. We are a praying church. But that we would also be a church of prayer warriors. That God in his sovereignty would stir us up to earnestly seek the blessing of the kingdom of heaven in this town, that we would be more and more a light to the nations in this city, Chicago, and through our missionaries around the world. Prayer warriors. Of course, none of us do that perfectly. There is a wrestling with God that is beyond us, and which Jacob is only a sign of. There is a greater and better Jacob, who also wrestled not just with God, but as God in that Garden of Gethsemane. He stood in the place of the wrath of our Esau's, the people we have needlessly offended by our sins, the sins that rise up against us and accuse us before a holy God. A greater, better Jacob, who took the blame for all our deceptions, for the Jacob in each of us, the true Son of God, whose side and hands and body was crucified, not just his hip, that we might receive the eternal blessing that God had originally designed for his creation, and that is finally and fully victorious at the foot of the cross.
That's Josh Moody, and this is the God-Centered Life. Talking about being blessed. Do we default to thinking of that phrase, being blessed, as being wealthy? And if we do, why?
Yeah, well, I think we do. Why? I think it's easy for us to think of blessings in the most obvious ways, I suppose. I'm blessed if I have more money this year than last year. I'm blessed if I have a bigger house. These are very obvious kinds of blessings. What people don't realize, and what the marketing people don't tell you, is the bigger house comes with bigger bills, and more money comes with more responsibility and more jealousy from those around you. And so material things can actually be a great curse if they are not given to us by God, if they're not something that comes as an expression of his approval upon our lives, but an expression of our own greed. It can be a great torture chamber of jealousy and bitterness. I could tell you many stories of people I know who've gone to their deathbed with much money and great misery. But the truth is that real blessing is much bigger than that. Real blessing is peace of mind and heart, joy, a sense of purpose and meaning. That's the blessed life, and that can only come as we are in a right relationship with our Heavenly Father.
Thank you for that, Josh. Just enough time to tell you that GodCenteredLife.org is our website where we're trying to put together things that will help you in your devotional life, help you pursue that God-centered life, and perhaps out of doing so, find new sources of blessing in your life. Next time we get together, we're going to make sure we know who all the players are.
Back in the ancient commentaries, you'll find people actually defending Jacob for how he treated Joseph. Does not the dad have the right to pick out which one of his sons is most worthy of honor? You won't find that around anymore.
Continuing our study in the book of Genesis when we get together next time. GodCenteredLife.org resources for you, and this is your invitation to join us for the next edition of The God-Centered Life with Josh Moody.